Star Trek Nemesis isn't exactly a recent movie, but I still wonder who asked for this. There's absolutely nothing we could have gained from it, and the plot is absolutely insane. Not in a good way. So I guess I'll be angrily listing bad aspects of it, which might take a while since it's most of the movie. I'll start by summarizing the plot, not only to make the rant more structured, but also because the plot is part of what makes the movie so bad. There are typically two ways a movie following a TV series plays out. One, it resolves or concludes something that wasn't in the TV series. Two, it's an episodic event that lets us revisit the series universe and catch a glimpse of the characters. Star Trek Nemesis was one of the latter, which is usually a more forgiving type of movie, since the plot can be self-contained. An issue or quest can, in other words, be developed specifically for the movie without really altering anything. The Romulan Empire has been overthrown in a coup d'etat, and the new leader wants to negotiate peace with the Federation of Planets. Meanwhile, there's a wedding reception taking place on board the Enterprise E. Will Riker and Deanna Troi, as they're headed for Beta Z for the ceremony. While they're heading there, they intercept the signal coming from a planet near the Romulan neutral zone. They speculate the signal might come from an android, so they head there to investigate. The investigation leads to the discovery of an android that looks exactly like Data. When they come under attack from the natives of the planet, they decide to bring him with them. They learn that his name is B4 and that his cognitive circuits aren't as advanced as Data's.
Remember, he's a prototype, but a lot less sophisticated than you are.
Back on the ship, they receive a message from General Janeway, who urges them to go on a diplomatic mission to Romulus. The mission is a peace negotiation with the new leader of the Romulan Empire, Shinson. And since Picard is both an experienced captain and in close proximity to the neutral zone, it only makes sense that he goes. And they set a course to meet up with the ship's scimitar. They meet up with the leader, who turns out to be a human. But not only is he human, he is a clone of Picard, right down to the painful illness he had as a child. Shinson was created in an attempt to infiltrate Starfleet, but when the plan was abandoned, so was he. He says that everything he's done since is to free the Remans on Remus, the mine planet where he was exiled. Sometime later, it's discovered that Shinson and his crew have attempted to access the computer system on the Enterprise, and they also make an attempt at violating Troy's mind. They also forcefully beam aboard Picard and B4, and then revealing that they were the ones who planted B4 on the planet where they found him. It was B4 accessing the computer files, and now they have both, Picard and the files they need in order to overthrow the Federation. But it turns out that the B4 they beamed aboard is actually Data, a plan which he and LaForge came up with, and he and Picard escaped together.
This way, sir. There is a shuttle bay 94 meters from our current position.
Back on the Enterprise, Dr. Crusher reveals that the reason Shinson wanted Picard is that due to complications caused by the cloning, he is deteriorating, and he needs all of Picard's blood in order to survive.
But the rate of decay seems to be accelerating.
And he'll come for me.
So the stakes are high because now they realize that the people on board the Scimitar are both after Picard and after destroying Earth, since that would cripple the Federation. But before they can do anything about that, they're attacked by several ships. But to their surprise, one of the Romulan ships actually turn out to be on their side and is there to help them. After a tough battle, they realize that the Scimitar is activating its deadly radiation weapon, and in an attempt to prevent it from killing everyone on board the Enterprise, Picard leaves Data in charge and heads off to destroy the generator. LaForge and Data then leave Troy in charge, so that they can launch Data into space, so that he can assist Picard, who has managed to make his way past the Remans and reach the generator. Data arrives right after Picard's won his battle against Shinson, and Data presses Picard's emergency transport button before he has a chance to protest. Data then shoots the generator with his phaser, both destroying it and himself. The rest of the movie consists of a memorial toast in Data's honor, and an epilogue where it's revealed that Riker is taking his ship Titan to the neutral zone where the Romulans are interested in talking. It's followed by a scene where Picard is talking to B4 about Data, and B4 humming a song. So I think I'll go with presenting the worst offender first. The writer hadn't watched the entire Next Generation. I don't have any proof of that, of course. The story is credited to 3 people: Rick Berman, Brent Spiner, and John Logan. Rick Berman produced The Next Generation, and Brent Spiner starred in it. But John Logan? I don't think he was involved in anything in The Next Generation, or even Star Trek in general, before Nemesis. But he's also the one who made the screenplay. He made the screenplay for Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, so he can obviously write. Which makes it even weirder that Star Trek Nemesis is such a mess. I know that Stuart Baird has received a lot of criticism for his directing of the movie, and it's actually really jarring how it's directed like a Star Wars movie. But it's almost overshadowed by all the plot holes in the writing. I know there are a lot of fans that are very positive towards the Troy and Riker union, but the problem there is that it often makes sense. They have great chemistry, but throughout the entire Next Generation, it's very obvious that even though they love each other, they're not compatible. In 11 out of 10 cases, Riker would choose his career. Troy accepts this because she wouldn't give up her life for him either. They've always been very mature about it, and they both engage in other relationships. To further drive home the point, she even becomes dumped by his transporter clone, Thomas Riker, because he too wants to pursue a career. It's not the only movie to insist on Troy and Riker as a couple, and I'll admit they were cute together in Trek Picard. But it still doesn't make it right. It was a bit unfair to not even give Worf and Troy a chance. They didn't have obvious chemistry, but they were good for each other. Maybe they wouldn't have lasted forever, but they could have had a good run. Why was Wesley at the wedding reception? He was wearing a uniform, suggesting that he'd become a lieutenant at some point. Did Rant actually watch The Next Generation? This comes up as weird. Since the last time we saw him, he was heading off into unknown places in the universe, along with a traveler. But if you've only read a synopsis of his character and story arc, it would make sense. He's the son of a starship officer, traveled aboard a starship, attended Starfleet Academy, became a cadet. He's also highly intelligent and helped save the Enterprise and his crew multiple times. And if you skip the part that says, joined an advanced species that phases in and out in order to move freely between time and dimensions, it makes sense to draw the conclusion that he'd be a lieutenant by now. I love Wesley, but it doesn't make sense for him to be there. The Law of B4. I think the only person who was shocked about there being another android in the universe was the writer, because everyone else was already familiar with the concept. Me and my friends basically went, oh no, they found Law's remains, when they discovered B4's body parts strewn about, because that would make sense. And I don't mean that it would make sense to randomly find him, but it would make sense for it to be him lying there. But Law isn't even mentioned in the movie, and everyone is just fascinated about there being another android in the universe. It's as if Law, Juliana and Lal never existed. If I'd been on the Enterprise and come across the remains of something that looked like Data's evil twin, I wouldn't have been very inclined to assemble that piece of trash. Shinzon's peace negotiation. Shinzon doesn't even try to hide the fact that he absolutely hates Romulans, the race which he's supposedly leading and representing. He's been exiled with the slave race Remans, and the Romulans have abused him since childhood. But none of this alarms the crew on board the Enterprise enough to make them leave, or even alert Janeway of the possible implications. They don't even contact her once the Forge detects Thalaron radiation being emitted from the scimitar, even though it's an illegal kind of radiation.
A microscopic amount could kill every living thing on this ship in a matter of seconds.
Because apparently none of this strikes them as strange in the peace negotiation. The scene where they get into Troy's head is very awkward from start to finish. Intimate relations isn't exactly something they're afraid of in Star Trek, but they're usually shot in a kind of light-hearted and fun way, with a few exceptions. This scene stood out as different because it was initially very romantically set up, but then there was a twist where Riker turns into Shinzon, which made it incredibly awkward and uncomfortable to watch. What made the entire thing even weirder was that it took two people to orchestrate, because Shinzon was the one that appeared inside Troy's head, but the Reman, acting as Shinzon's viceroy, was the one with the telepathic abilities, and you also briefly see his face inside her head. Were they both mentally present for all of it? To make matters even worse, Picard denies Troy her request of being relieved of duty. He tells her that he needs her by his side, and asks her to withstand any further break-ins into her head. Picard wouldn't do this. Even if there was no physical damage, it's very obviously something that can end up traumatizing a person. And I think it's fair to say that she's quite shaken by the event, since she tells the Viceroy, "Remember me?" later in the movie, a vindictive comment not exactly typical of the level-headed Troy. Before he can explain his insane reasoning, he's forcefully beamed away. I think this scene is supposed to make it clear that even though Troy sees herself as a liability because of what happened, Picard still trusts her abilities. But that's not how the scene comes across at all, and no rational person would ask her to keep working. Remans were living on the mine planet Remus, where they were used as mining slaves for the Romulans. The planet was tidally locked.
As you can see, one side of Remus always faces the sun.
The side facing the sun was uninhabitable due to the heat, so the Remans were living on the dark side and were extremely sensitive to light. This sounds absolutely awful, and I understand that once you've oppressed the people, it's relatively easy to make them think they're powerless. A lot of circuses around the world have managed to successfully make elephants afraid of sticks by repeatedly brutalizing them with sticks, which goes to show that pure aggression and intimidation go a long way, even against someone who's physically much stronger. But even with this in mind, I cannot fathom how the Romulans managed to impress the Remans. They're a race described as having been bred for war and conquest, which I'm assuming they didn't start doing after being thrown into slavery. Romulans are also strong warriors known for their fierce tactics and military proficiency, so maybe let's sweep the floor with the Remans. But wait. Didn't they illustrate that the Remans were actually very capable telepaths, capable of breaking into the minds of other species? The Viceroy was even able to bring a friend with them into someone else's head, and I fail to see how they couldn't have used this ability to their advantage long ago. It just doesn't sit right with me that they needed a human to stage the revolution. Shin-Song planted B4. This was not explained in the movie, and there is no obvious way in which it could have occurred. I'm a big fan of subtlety. You kind of have to be able to draw your own conclusions based on the context and the information you're given. We're not given any. We're just expected to accept the guy who's been created in a lab and dumped on a slave planet got access to a race so valuable that even Starfleet's own scientists have debated picking data apart to study him. Remember how I said that this movie fails to mention the other next generation androids? Now this is extra awkward because according to the Memory Alpha Wiki, there were mentions of law in the original script, which makes the entire scenario both better and worse at the same time. It makes it better because even though someone made a decision not to include this in the movie, at least they were aware of law. What makes it worse is still unfortunately asked how many androids Zoom created, to which Data replies that he was only aware of himself and law. The final script is a complete mess, and the original one isn't much better, but at least it contains an explanation as to how B4 ended up in the hands of Shin-Song. The Parkleds found B4 on Omicron Theta and traded him to the Bolians. From there he somehow came to end up with the Cardassians, who ejected him into space due to thinking he was trash. Some Telosians had apparently picked up the B4 debris, and I'm guessing that Shin-Song brutally murdered them to get a hold of him. Shin-Song apparently learned about B4 from a Cardassian historian, which makes about as much sense as the rest of this fanfiction. Give me all your blood. It's so stupid. I can't take the deceased part seriously. The reason Picard can't just save the life of Shin-Song is that it would require a complete blood transfusion. This would be a problem in a zombie apocalypse universe, but in a universe where you can replicate cells with perfect precision and clone entire human beings, this is a huge gaping plot hole. There are so many ways in which that problem could have been solved with a readily available technology accessible to the leader of the Romulan Empire. But they probably didn't want Picard to be involved in any way of saving him. But they also didn't want to make him guilty of not trying to save him, so they made up this contrived medical reason why he needed all of Picard's blood. And we wouldn't want Picard to die now, would we? The degenerative complication causing the need for Picard's blood is also a way of raising the stakes, since now we know that Shin-Song is going to come for him. But then, later in the movie, they don't want to go through with the rest of the steps of this plot line, so they just do away with it. But they know we'll have questions about this one, so they offer us a very logical and concise explanation that goes something along the lines of, surely he wouldn't blow us up. That would hurt him as much as it would hurt you. It's not about him anymore. And on board the scimitar, Shin-Song is saying how some causes are worth dying for. It's a very obvious plot hole, so they had the crews of both ships explain to us why it's not a plot hole. It's important to keep a level head in the face of a disaster, so of course everyone's running around like headless chicken. Lucky then that I have an android on board that can use the available resources in order to save the day. But obviously that's not what happens. Instead, the captain of the ship goes on a suicide mission. Data does, however, follow him in order to save the day, and one would think he'd do it in a way that makes sense, but instead he stands like an idiot and shoots the generator with his phaser. I've heard of bombs. He has a working phaser, so he could have emergency transported Picard away from there, and then set his phaser to overload before removing himself from the danger. Phaser pistols overloading and resulting in explosions is something that's occurred in The Next Generation before, on multiple occasions. So instead of killing the main character, they could have had him do that. The problem with the scenario, where he removes himself from the danger, is that they were only carrying one emergency transporter, because apparently no one thought it was a good idea to replicate it. Reading discussions about this online is actually kind of entertaining, because the replies are divided between people who recognize this as a plot hole and people defending the decision not to replicate a potentially dangerous piece of technology. None of this, however, matters. It's not a brand new piece of technology. There's no reason why Data couldn't have brought a transport unit with him when they were on board the Enterprise, because chronologically several different variations of emergency transport units with other names have been developed and used. The experimental part on the one Picard was wearing was that it was tiny. That's it. LaForge modified it to make it tiny. But let's pretend that there was no time for him to grab a transporter unit. Are we going to ignore the fact that they showed us an entire shuttle bay full of Scorpion-type attack flyers?
According to the ship's manifest, they're Scorpion-class attack flyers.
They were shown to be strong enough to shoot through the interior walls. It would have been much faster for Data to reach Picard if he just shot his way through all the walls getting there, which probably would have allowed him to get out of there before everything exploded. Where's Data's emotion chip? It's no surprise that someone who's not familiar with lore would omit Data's emotion chip or fail to understand its importance for his personal development. The emotion chip is such a powerful item, and even though Data is shown to have the greatest of respect for it, and is initially even a bit afraid of it, he eventually learns to control it. In the dark vision of the future that Picard has in the Next Generation's finale, Data is shown to have mastered it. And in the regular timeline, Data is also shown to embrace the emotions, in both Star Trek Generations, where he struggles with them, and in Star Trek First Contact, where he's learned to master them. It was a cruel and unnecessary move to kill Data, and it did need to happen, but if they were set on doing it anyway, they should have done it the right way. Data arguably has his own set of emotions, or at least sentience. This, along with his Starfleet training, morals, and his friendship, drives him to sacrifice himself. But I don't feel like that's enough. It was selfless of him to switch places with Picard, but it would have meant so much more if he'd been wearing his emotion chip. Data was able to turn his emotion chip off when he needed to, and perhaps he just appeared to not have this emotion chip installed because he wanted to be efficient. But in a deleted scene, Worf and LaForge enters his room after he's dead. Worf decides to take care of the cat, and LaForge picks up the emotion chip. I realized that since the scene was deleted from the final cut, it's not technically canon anymore, but the entire movie must have been shot under the assumption that Data wasn't wearing his emotion chip. And if you look at the wedding reception where everyone laughs at him and he has no idea what's going on, it's blatantly obvious that he's not wearing his emotion chip. And also, who would choose to go to a wedding without their emotions? There are many offensive things in this movie, and I said earlier that the worst one was that the writer hadn't seen The Next Generation in its entirety. That's only the second worst thing in the movie. The worst one is the final scene of the movie, where Picard is talking to B4 about Data. That in itself isn't all that bad, but the scene kind of implies that since B4 has a copy of Data's memories, that part of him survived. B4 has been shown having difficulties accessing Data's memories, but as he starts humming the song that Data sang at the wedding reception, Picard sings along for a bit and then walks away smiling. This ending is the worst. It's as if the writer thinks that just because they're both androids, that they're interchangeable. This despite the fact that the movie contains a conversation between Picard and Data, where they establish that neither Shinson nor B4 would ever be able to replace them.
I aspire, sir, to be better than I am. B4 does not, nor does Shinzon.
Their own movie has established that not even clones are interchangeable. So what is this stupid and sappy scene? The general tone of the movie. At the core of The Next Generation is the friendship between the characters. There was no effort put into displaying this in Nemesis, which makes the tone of the movie radically different from the series. They focus on a battle aspect, which wouldn't necessarily take you out of the mood, but none of Nemesis is filmed, scripted, or edited like an episode of The Next Generation. Instead, we have this weird back and forth between seeing what's happening on the Enterprise and what's happening on the Scimitar. It feels as if someone wanted to film a Star Wars movie but settled for anything with Star in the title. And I'm not saying that to be mean, because technically it's not a bad production. It just doesn't capture the essence of The Next Generation at all. People involved in creating Nemesis were clearly skilled in their professions, but they shouldn't have been allowed to touch The Next Generation before watching it from start to finish.
I do not understand. I know. What are you doing? I must deactivate you.
You understand me?
Yes, sir.